IHMS.
Defeat of the Queen of Silent Genocide, the Victory of Minorities in Ethiopia, by Professor Abdi Khalil, narrated by Sheikh Mustari Abdul Kabir. Ethiopia's political sickness boils down to numerical power politics, false singular national identity, and ownership. However, as Trevor Cole puts it eloquently, every ethnic is treasure of humanity. Diversity is natural and real, but debasing it is undemocratic and inhuman. Over the last weeks, there was an attempt to strangle the rights of Hararis to vote for their constituencies, suffocate a regional state parliamentary election, and thereby eroding the existence of Harari regional state and minorities' rights in Ethiopia. The chair of the National Election Board of Ethiopia, Ms. Burtukan Medkessa, who unconstitutionally decided to cancel the rights of Hararis outside of Harar to vote for their representatives. Ms. Burtukan, dubbed as the Queen of Silent Genocide among minorities, is a well-known political figure in the last decades, advocating against and denying the rights of minorities in Ethiopia. She was a member of a political party known as Kinjit, which advocated the dismantling of federal constitutions and paving ways to go back to the hegemonic imperial system. She's one of the extreme Neftengas who promote one flag, one language, one culture, one religion, and unitary governance system. With such political mindset and abusing her profession as a lawyer, she single-handedly propagates social injustice against minorities' rights by declaring and limiting regional states' power and constitutions. However, Tuesday 27, April 2021 is a victory day, and not only for Hararis, but also for the minorities and diverse peoples of Ethiopia, since the Federal Supreme Court of Ethiopia has ruled against their illfully conceived voting decision and the rights of Hararis. Generally, her abuses and harassments amount to silent genocide of minorities in Ethiopia. Equally, Ethiopia's House of Federation had also previously condemned and ruled against her actions, and highlighted that she unconstitutionally and illegally acted in the name of Ethiopia's National Election Board, which has no mandate to interpret, modify, improve, and delete constitutional laws of the land. Having heard of the good news, it is also time to understand openly why the federal constitution enshrines the rights of minorities and supports autonomy of minorities as regional states. Here are some facts related to Harar as an example. It is an undeniable fact that the four enumerated large ethnic groups in Ethiopia are Oromos, Amhara, Somali, and Tigray. Similarly, in the Harari regional state, the majorities are Oromo, followed by Amharas and Hararis. The establishment of Harari regional state was not solely based on numbers, only as numbers are not the only determining factor in establishing a state, a regional admiration, or any administrative entity, be it in Ethiopia or elsewhere in the world. Historical facts, indigenous people, socioeconomic contributions, and affirmatives, as well as reviving, dwindling social groups due to systematic ethnic cleansing and centuries repression, were the prominent factors in establishing the Harari regional state. Some details and concrete facts are presented next to retain and protect Harar as autonomous part and parcel within Ethiopia. Number 1. Historical facts. Referring to many national and international historians and documented facts, Harar is an ancient metropolis of once mighty city, the only permanent settlement in Eastern Africa, the reported seat of Muslim learning, a walled city of religious sites, millennia-old houses, possessing its independent chief, its peculiar population, its known language, and its own coinage. The emporium of the coffee trade and the great manufacture of cotton clothes. The list is endless. Before the rise of Addis Ababa and Nairobi, Harar was the only city worth of the title in East Africa, between the city of Axum and the Arab city of Zanzibar on the East Africa coast island. It is impossible to write the history of Harar and Harari people in few paragraphs. Its people exhibit distinct cultural and traditional values. The city itself composes many world heritages and protected sites. Some even called Harar a living museum. It was a hub for education, agriculture, and trade with its own currency. Its dynasty enumerated 76 known emirs, kings from Amir Habuba from 1969 to 1000, ending with Amir Abdullahi from 1885 to 1887. Sadly, because of geopolitical pressures and invading forces, it is reduced from a country used to stretch to Zelia, east coast of Somalia, and north to Eritrea, to its current tiny state with physical surface area of 356 square kilometers. Would these facts suffice to protect and preserve Harar from unjustified and illegal attacks? Hararis have never given up and will never give up on their natural right to govern themselves. They have withstood the brutal and dictatorship rules of Menelik, Haile Selassie, and Mengistu regimes. In 1948, the Harari people organized peaceful movement, Khulub, for self-determination. Unfortunately, this movement was crushed by the tyrant regime. The leaders of this movement were exiled, and many were sent to Debra Marcos, Jimma, and Gore notorious prisons. Generally, Hararis were displaced within Ethiopia, and most immigrated to foreign lands since then. However, as most Ethiopian ethnic groups or nations and nationalities were liberated in 1990s, the Harari regional state came to light within the Federal Democratic Republic of Ethiopia as well. Number 2. Indigenous people. According to UN sources, the Covenant of the League of Nations, indigenous peoples are referred to non-self-governing or colonized peoples as indigenous peoples. In 1950s, ILO began referring to the problems of indigenous populations in independent countries, which is to say, culturally and geographically distinct communities that were non-self-governing, marginalized, and colonized inside the borders of independent states. The terms indigenous people, indigenous ethnic minorities, and tribal groups are used to describe social groups that share similar characteristics, namely a social and cultural identity that is distinct from the dominant groups in society. United Nations human rights bodies, ILO, the World Bank, and international law apply 4 criteria to distinguish indigenous peoples. A. Indigenous peoples usually live within or maintain attachments to geographically distinct ancestral territories. B. They tend to maintain distinct social, economic, and political institutions within their territories. C. They typically aspire to remain distinct culturally, geographically, and institutionally, rather than assimilate fully into national society. D. They self-identify as indigenous or tribal. Self-identification as indigenous or tribal is usually regarded as a fundamental criterion for determining whether groups are indigenous or tribal, sometimes in combination with other variables, such as language spoken and geographic location or concentration. By all accounts, or any UN definition and convention, Hararis are indigenous people. The indigenous people criterion alone is more than enough to protect, uphold, and retain the rights of Hararis and the Harari regional state. The majority's code of conduct towards indigenous people is a litmus test whether they're in control of their power, democratic principles, or upholding the rules of law, as well as how different they are from dictatorship and genocide monsters. Number 3. Minority rights and self-determination. Various human and minority rights studies point out that national and international concern for the protection of the minorities predates the modern state system. It can be traced as far back as to the Constitution of Medina, drafted by Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, and the spirit of the Quranic laws of tolerance towards the people of other faiths, especially those of the Bible. As a result, the protected minorities, especially Jews and Christians, were granted religious and cultural rights and were governed by their personal codes. Non-Muslims living under Muslim rule were treated with tolerance, and many of them rose to the highest positions in the state and made notable contributions to the growth of Islamic civilization. In the 20th century civilization, the UN Declaration on Minorities in its first article affirms that governments shall protect the existence and the national or ethnic, cultural, religious, and linguistic identity of minorities within their respective territories and shall encourage conditions for the promotions of that identity. Along with minority rights, the doctrine of affirmative action attempts to redress the harmful or inhuman practices of past racial or social discrimination and to correct current socioeconomic inequalities. The aim of affirmative action is always equity and equality. Affirmative action always maintains that it is indeed to remedy years of discrimination, and it is compensatory. Positive measures by governments may also be necessary to protect the identity of minority and the rights of its members to enjoy and develop their culture and language and to practice their religion in community with the other members of the group. Thus, Harar and Hararis did qualify under Ethiopia Constitution in establishing the Harari regional state in the 1990s. According to UN conventions, self-government rights devolve powers to smaller political units so that a national minority cannot be outvoted or outbid by the majority on decisions that are of importance to their culture, such as issues of education, immigration, resource development, language, and family law. Underlining these evidences, the historical facts, affirmative action, indigenous rights, minority rights, and human rights all significantly prove that the establishment of the Harari regional state is not anomalous, as some intend to claim, and attempt to distort the facts about Harar. Its restoration is legal and abides all national and international laws. Based on Ethiopia's federal constitution, the establishment of a separate regional state for the Hararis also emanates from the Covenant of the League of Nations, referred to indigenous peoples and diversity. All the facts presented here show that Harar and the Harari people perfectly fitted all the political categories, criteria, principles, and the UN Convention, and thus, unequivocally, the restoration of Harar and Harari people as a state in the 1990s is justified. Harari regional state within Ethiopian galaxy is not only minority rights, but also human rights, as well as upholding multiculturalism and diversity within Ethiopia. All in all, the case of Harar and the cases of minorities in Ethiopia are suffice to build peaceful federal Ethiopia. Number 4. Ethiopia where to? Way backward or forward? What on earth is happening in Ethiopia today? Specifically, the ill political signposts in all regions of Ethiopia. More than ever, it appears that it has become directionless and destructive. Instead of way forward, going backward with repression, abuses, harassments, and inhumanity, using different political forms and formats as perceived and practiced by some extreme forces and political parties. Way backward. A broken alliance or promise has manifested itself in the name of enumerated majority, denying minorities and multinationals their constitutional and inalienable rights. The extreme party officials tyrannizing the minorities just as a single ruler is inclined to do in a dictatorial regime. As James Baldwin puts it, ignorance aligned with power is the most ferocious enemy justice can have. For example, here are some outstanding enemies of multiculturalism, multinationalism, and the Muslims. 1. Some party, Ezema, leaders such as Birhanu Nega, who's full of anti-Islam rhetoric and Muslim activities in Ethiopia. This professor of Islamophobia has recently promised in his election campaign that he will scrap Islamic Bank in Ethiopia and limit Muslims' involvement in social and economic development the next day if elected. In addition, He's an avid supporter of anti-Islamic laws and Muslim segregation in France. Just wondering, a person whose intentions are antisocial and inequality happened to claim as the leader of Ethiopian citizens for Social Justice Party? Ezema? Where is the social justice if he is against the majority of Ethiopia's population, the Muslims? His inequality intentions are real, and the Muslims have to condemn and shun out such enemy of Muslims. 2. Vision Ethiopia, an entity founded and run by extreme Amhara intellectuals and elite whose aim is to reestablish imperial Ethiopia with hegemonic political agenda. They have unique and deep hate for Muslims and Oromos in Ethiopia, and of course, for multinational and multicultural Ethiopia. Their vision is to resurrect imperial Ethiopia's political landscape through expansionism, marginalization, and assimilation, thereby emulsifying diversity into one religion, one flag, one language, and one culture. They are a misguided group of so-called Amhara intellectuals with enumerated power politics and imperial or Naftanya vision in violating the basic and inalienable rights of indigenous minorities, 80 plus diverse ethnic and the Muslim population of Ethiopia. Their recent declaration on Ethiopia's political tantamount, declaring war against Muslims and Oromos of Ethiopia. 3. Equally, some Ethiopia's federal democratic government officials have chosen to ignore in protecting and guaranteeing the rights of minorities throughout the country. Rather, it is directly or indirectly encouraging the few misguided parties to use illegal and unconstitutional political means and tactics, creating constant threats among minorities and Muslims in Ethiopia. Diakon Daniel Kebrat, an advisor to the Prime Minister, always propagates Amhara and Orthodox supremacy. He hallucinates to Amharize everything and every ethnic in Ethiopia. Also, he is a well-known religious and political figure against Ethiopian Muslims. Another example is Ethiopia's National Election Board chairwoman, who happens to prove herself as a flagship of silent genocidal and minority cleansing character. She's supposed to work impartially and in non-partisan manners, but she has opted to work with striking opposing resemblance to what Thomas Jefferson stated. It is of great importance in a republic not only to guard the society against the oppression of its rulers, but to guard one part of the society against the injustices of the other part. She is now the symbol of social injustices and the parcel of partisan politics. In a nutshell, within chronic current Ethiopia's politics, the forces of evil abuse human and group rights. The forces of extreme monotribalism battered minorities, and the forces of deep state are recreating merciless expansionism, marginalization, and assimilation of diverse peoples of Ethiopia. Recycling ill ideologies are bound to take Ethiopia backwards, if not disintegrating. It is a recurrent phenomenon in Ethiopia. The forces of evil always demean diversity, mortify minorities, and demonize Muslims. Way forward. Multinational and multicultural advocates and entities should wake up, organize, and fight back such insensitive political parties. A repeat of repression and oppression under the banner of unitary systems cannot happen. The 80 plus ethnic Ethiopians can coexist as humans. All ethnics, including Amharas, should collectively work to uphold the integrity, rights, freedoms, and historical facts of multinational and multicultural Ethiopia. Especially the extreme Amharas, or locally known as Naftanyas, should come to terms that the geopolitics of 1880s marked the loss of glorious heights of peace and prosperity of diverse people of the Horn, West, and Southern kingdoms. Amhara supremacy or any extremism has no place in current Ethiopia, and thus any extreme groups have to come to terms to embrace diversity, equality, and inclusiveness. True Ethiopians feel and understand the agony of 80 plus ethnics and the silent genocide committed in Imperial Ethiopia and thereafter in authoritarian regimes. We need to humanly support each ethnic to be free, respected, and united in a diverse nation called Federal Democratic Ethiopia, in line with UNESCO's Universal Declaration on Cultural Diversity. Of course, consolidating and establishing democratic multinational Ethiopia is the only way out to have equity and equality without repeating some of the political pitfalls in the last centuries. Upholding the essence of democratic federalism or multinationalism in a true sense is the way forward. Not monocultural identity, but multinational federalism is collective national identity, ownership, and beauty. Not only multinational federalism, though not fully implemented yet, is the recognition of ethnic language and culture, but also the recognition of indigenous rights to land and natural resources, as well as running their own affairs in freedom. Let me wind up my messages for all Ethiopians to stop internal bleeding by quoting Dr. Martin Luther King, who said that we must learn to live together as brothers or we will perish together as fools. Also, IHMS sincerely congratulates the Harari National Regional State officials, the Harari youth, all Hararis at home and abroad for coming together in defeating such extremist and abusive government official. Alhamdulillah, no matter how long it takes, justice and truth always prevail. It is a high time to get organized with assorted resources and actively being involved in the upcoming election to mitigate such political genocide in unwarranted Ethiopia. By grace of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the city of peace and saints will continue to exist. Assalamu alaikum.
IHMS